We are now going to do lesson 7, use benchmark fractions to compare and order. So let's look at our definition. Benchmark fractions are common fractions, such as 1/2, that are often used to compare and order fractions. So let's look at their example. A recipe for granola uses 5/8 a cup of raisins and 1/6 a cup of dried cranberries. Is there a greater amount of raisins or cranberries? Compare 5/8 and 1/6. So instead of using the least common multiple that we used in the last lesson, the LCM, we're going to use 1/2 as a benchmark fraction. So we know that 1/2 is equivalent to 4/8 and 3/6. So 1/2 is equivalent to 4/8 and 3/6. Now we can compare 5/8 to 1/2 and 1/6 to 1/2. So 5/8 is greater than 1/2 and 1/6 is less than 1/2. So now we know that 5/8 is bigger than 1/6. We can also see that because our lines equal up at 1 and 0, so 0 and 1, we can tell 1/6 is smaller than 5/8. So on to page 2. Now we're going to list 7/8, 1/2, and 1/3 in order from least to greatest. So we're going to also use 1/2 as a benchmark fraction. We know that 1/2 is equivalent to 4/8 and 3/6. So 1/2, 4/8, and 3/6. And so we're going to compare 7/8 and 1/2 and 1/3 and 1/2. Well, 7/8 is over here, and that is greater than 4/8 or 1/2. And 3/6, well, 2/6 is smaller than 3/6 or 1/2. So in order from least to greatest, the fractions are 1/3, 1/2, and 7/8. We can also write that 1/3, 1/2, and 7/8. Okay, so guided practice. We're going to use a benchmark fraction to compare. So 3/4 and 1/2. Well, the benchmark fraction they've been showing us is 1/2. We can see over here with our fraction bars over here, 1/2, well, 3/4 is bigger than that. So 3/4 is greater than 1/2. What about 3/6 and 3/4? Well, we know from all these examples up here, and because 3 is half of 6, that 3/6 also equals 1/2. And now we have the same problem as up here. 3/4 and 1/2, 3/4 is greater than 1/2. Okay. So page 3, we're going to use a benchmark fraction to compare, and they even give us the number lines here. So 4/5 and 1/3. Well, they're telling us our benchmark fraction should be 1/2. So 4/5 is right here, and 1/3 is right here. So 1/2 is right down the middle here. So 4/5 is bigger than 1/3. So 4/5 is greater than 1/3. Now we have 1/2 and 3/5. 3/5. I drew 4/5. There we go. 3/5. So which one is bigger? 3/5 is slightly bigger than 1/2. Okay, here they don't give us a number line, but we can use our fraction bars, or we can use just the logic we already know. So let's see, 1/3 and 8/10. Let's look over here. 1/3 is only equal to about 1, 2, and partway through 3/8. So let's go down to 3/10. So nope, 8/10 is all the way over here. So 8/10 is much bigger than 1/3. Number 6, 2/3 and 1/6. Well, we could even use some math on this one because we know 3 times 2 is 6. So 2/3 times 2 over 2 is 4/6. So which one is bigger? 4/6 is bigger than 1/6. Now we have 3/4 and 2/5. So this one, they're a little bit closer, so we're not going to know right off the bat. So 3/4, 1, 2, 3, and 2/5, 1, 2. 2/5 is much smaller than 3/4. So 3/4 is greater than 2/5. Now we have 1/4 and 4/5. Well, if we had a number line, like they're showing us up there, we have 0 and 1 and 1/2. Well, our 1/4 would be over here, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/5. This would be 4/5. So which one is bigger? 4/5 is greater than 1/4. That's another way we can do it if we don't have our fraction bars with us. Now we have 1/3 and 1/8. Well, we can use our numerator trick with this one because they have the same numerator. The one that has the bigger denominator is going to be smaller because remember, this 1/8 is cut up into a bunch more smaller pieces than 1/3. Okay, now we have 3/6 and 2/4. Well, 3/6 is also equal to 1/2 because half of 6 is 3, and 2/4 is also equal to 1/2 because half of 4 is 2. So these are equal. I think those were our only equal one. Okay, now we are going to order from least to greatest. So we don't need to know what they are exactly, we just need to be able to order them from least to greatest. And they're giving us the benchmark fraction of 1/2. Okay, so we have 1/2, 1/8, and 3/4. So 1/2 is going to be in the middle. So which one's bigger? Well, 1/8 is all the way down here, and 3/4 is all the way over here. So 3/4 is our biggest, and 1/8 is our smallest. Now we have 12. Well, 1/2 is going to be in the middle because that's our benchmark fraction. And then we can do our numerator trick where these have the same numerator. So which one has the larger denominator? That's 8. So 3/8 is smaller than 3/5. Now we have 13. Well, we have 2/3, 1/6, and 1/2. Well, we can trade this, so it's 2/3, and we can multiply each side by 2, and we get 4/6. So we have the same denominator. So 1/6, 1/2, because that's our benchmark in the middle, and 4/6. And that's our order. Okay. Problem solving. A recipe calls for 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. Which fraction is greater? Well, which fraction has more? 1/4 or 1/2? Well, we can change 1/4 in, well, we'll leave 1/4, but we can change 1/2 into 2/4. That's the same. So 1/4 is less than 2/4. So which fraction is greater? The salt. Sarah ran 3/4 a mile on Saturday and 1/2 mile on Sunday. On which day did Sarah run farther? Well, so we have 3/4 and 1/2. We could use our chart over here and see that 1/2 is equal to 2/4. So 3/4 is greater. We could also multiply each side by 2 and get 2/4. And we can also see that 3/4 is greater than 2/4. So that means on Saturday, she ran further. A blanket is made up of 7/10 a yard of red fabric and 1/3 a yard of blue fabric. Is there more red fabric or blue fabric in the blanket? So we have 7/10, and we're comparing it to 1/3. Well, we could find our least common multiple, which here is going to be 30. So we can say 30/21 because we're multiplying it by 3. Or multiply each side over here by 10. So we get 10/30. And compare it that way and see that 21 is much bigger than 10. Or we could remember that we could use our base mark fraction of 1/2 and see 1/2 is bigger than 1/3, but smaller than 7/10. So more red fabric is used in the blanket. Okay. 1/6 of the garden has tomatoes. 1/2 of the garden has peppers. 1/3 of the garden has onions. List the fractions in order from greatest to least. Okay, so we have to do greatest to least. So 1/6, 1/2, and 1/3. Well, we can first use our chart over here as our number line. So we have 1/2 kind of in the middle here. Well, it is in the middle because it's 1/2. 1/6 is over here, so 1/6 is smaller than 1/2. What about 1/3? 1/3 is also smaller than 1/2. So instead of our greater than symbols going the same way, we have them flipped. So in order from greatest to least, well, 1/2 is greater than 1/3 is greater than 1/6. And now they want us to draw and label a diagram. So we're going to want to have 6 different pieces. So here's my garden. 1/2 are peppers. So I'm going to say pepper, pepper, pepper. 1/3 of the garden is onions, onion, onion. And 1/6 has tomatoes. So I'm going to put a T. So that's our diagram. Okay. Now we need to write a fraction that is greater than 1/3 and less than 1/2. We're not going to worry about drawing a model because we're going to use a model to decide. So greater than 1/3 and less than 1/2. So it has to fit in this little spot right here. Well, our first one is 1/5. So that fits right there. We could also say 3/8 or 4/9, and we can keep going. There are an infinite number of fractions between 1/3 and 1/2, and you're not going to have to deal with those all the time. But it's good to know how to figure those out. Okay, now explain how to decide if 3/4 is greater than 1/6. Well, first we could use our number line. We can see that 1/6 is over here and 3/4 is over here. Or we could use a benchmark fraction. We could have 1/2 right here and see again that 1/6 is smaller and 3/4 is bigger. Or we could find our least common multiple. So we have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, and for 6 we have 6, 12, 18, and so on. I can already see that our least common multiple is 12. So 3/4 Fourths times 3 over 3 would be 9/12, and 1/6. To get 12, we have to multiply by 2. So 1 times 2, and 6 times 2 is 12. So which one is bigger? 9/12, which is also 3/4, is bigger than 1/6. Okay, on to the homework. Connor has completed 3/8 of his homework. Aiden has finished 5/6 of his homework. Who is closer to be finished? So they use a benchmark fraction here. They see 1/2 is equal to 4/8 is equal to 3/6. And then they see that 3/8 is smaller and 5/8 is greater. So Aiden is closer to finishing his homework than Connor. So let's look at the practice. Use a benchmark fraction to compare. So we have 3/8 and 3/4. Well, we can use our benchmark fraction of 1/2. 1/2 with a denominator of 4 is equal to 2 over 4. And 1/2 with a denominator of 8 is 4 over 8. So this 3/8 is less than 1/2, while 3/4 is greater than 1/2. Now we have 4/6 and 3/8. Well, we can do the same thing. We can have 1/2 is equal to 4/8 and is equal to 3/6. Well, 4/6 is greater than 3/6, while 3/8 is greater than, or is less than 4/8. So 4/6 is greater than 3/8. Okay, now we have 1/8 and 5/6. So use the same benchmark of 1/2 is also equal to 3/6 is also equal to 4/8. Well, 1/8 is smaller than 4/8, and 3/6 is less than 5/6. So we can tell that 1/8 is less than 5/6. On to the last page. So we're going to use benchmark fractions to compare. So we have 1/3 and 3/4. So 1/3, 3/4. This one we can easily see 3/4 is greater than 1/3. Okay, 3/5 and 2/6. Well, which one is greater? 3/5 is greater than 2/6. Okay, 3/6 and 2/5. Well, we can use our 1/2 trick again. So 1/2 is also is equal to, we can't do that with this one because it's not an even number. So this is a good example of sometimes that 1/2 trick isn't going to work. So instead, we can look over at our chart and see that 2/5 and 3/6 are right here. 2/5 is less than, or 3/6 is greater than 2/5, or we could find our least common multiple, which would be 30. So this would end up being 12 over 30, and this would end up being 15 over 30. Number 7, we have 2/4 and 2/3. Well, this one, right off the bat, we can simplify this to 1/2 and 2/3, and we know 1/2 is less than 2/3. We can check that over here, 1/2 and 2/3. Now we're going to order from least to greatest. We have 1/2, 1/4, and 2/3. Well, our benchmark in the middle is 1/2. Now 1/4, we can use our numerator trick and see 1/4 is smaller, or less than 1/2, which leaves 2/3 greater than, and we already know that from number 7. Now number 9, we have 3/6, 3/4, and 2/8. Well, first we can simplify our 3/6 to 1/2 and see that that's going to be our benchmark fraction. We can use our numerator trick to see that because these both have a numerator of 3, that 4 3/4 is going to be greater than, which leaves 2/8 as smaller than. We can also check that because 2/8 is equal to 1/4, and 1/4 is smaller than 3/4. On to number 10. Bailey has an hour to get ready for school. She spends 3/6 of that time getting dressed. She spends 1/4 of that time eating breakfast. She spends 1/5 of that time packing her backpack. Which activity does Bailey spend the greatest amount of time doing? So really what we need to do is order these to see which one is greatest. So we have 3/6, 1/5, and 1/4. Well, I notice right away that 3/6 simplifies to 1/2. So I'm going to put 1/2 over here. Now 1/4, we can use our numerator trick for all three of these, and we can see 1/2 is going to be our biggest, then 1/4 is less than that, and 1/5 is less than that. So which one was equal to 1/2? Well, that was the 3/6 getting dressed. You could also plot these on a number line and also see where they line up. Number 11. Zane eats 3/8 of a pizza. Later, he eats a half of the same pizza. Did he eat more the first or second time? That's a lot of pizza. So we have 3/8 and 1/2. Well, we could use our knowledge that 1/2 is also equal to 4/8 because 4 is half of 8, and see that 3/8 is smaller than 1/2. So he ate more the second. So how do you use benchmark fractions? Well, it's that 1/2 trick we've been talking about, and you could also do it with 1/4 or 1/3, any fraction that you know right off the top of your head. So how do I use benchmark fractions? I compare fractions on either side of that benchmark to see which are greater and which are less than. So which fraction is not greater than 2/5? So 2/5, well, let's look through. Let's look at A, 3/10. Well, let's make 2/5 have the same denominator. That would be 4/10 because we multiply each side by 2. So is 4/10 greater than 3/10? Yes. So this could be our answer, but let's check our other ones. So 7/10, is that greater or less than? That's greater, so that can't be our answer. 2/4, we can use our numerator trick and see that 2/5 is going to be less than 2/4, so that's not our answer. And 3/6 is also equal to 1/2. And we can use this comparison we already did up here of 4/10. Multiply each side by 5. Is 5/10 greater than 4/10? Yep, so that's not our answer, so our answer is C. And that is the end of lesson 7.